is scheduled to start tomorrow night in Anaheim. Former second-round pick, highly coveted prospect in the organization. For Padres fans that haven't seen him, what can they expect to see when he's on the mound tomorrow? And thanks for hopping on, David.
Yeah, always good to talk to you guys. And John, you do have that right. It's Mazur is the pronunciation. So there you go. So Mazur opened the year in Double-A. As you said, he was the second-round pick, the third pick they had in 2022. So he is hitting the majors not quite 2 years after he was first drafted. Didn't pitch at all the year he was signed. The Padres really made a habit of doing that with a lot of their higher-end pitching guys, is working with them outside of competition the summer after they're drafted. But really made a name for himself last year, and then, like I said, started this year in Double-A. Blew through there pretty well, and so he's been up in Elsinore, in El Paso for the last 4 starts he's made. He's a righty with really that sort of standard starting pitcher 4-pitch mix, a fastball that's been sitting pretty consistently around 96, slider. If you look at the TrackMan data on Savant, they're actually miscategorizing that pitch as a cutter, but it is a slider that he throws. And then he's got a change and a curve that he'll mix in to keep hitters honest and to work on eye level a little bit.
Should we take anything from his struggles in AAA, or is just that's the league and it's just it's a hitter's league, and that 7 ERA and the 4 starts he's had there doesn't really mean much, and we should look at the 1.95 ERA he had in Double-A?
Yeah, and I don't think you should expect a 1.95 ERA in the big leagues, but also don't think you should expect a 7.83.
Yeah.
He came up. The first 2 appearances he had were in Las Vegas, which is probably the premier hitting environment in the Pacific Coast League, and then made a start at home, which in El Paso is close behind. So certainly in that environment, I don't think you worry too much about some of the runs. His last outing was sort of a weird one that wound up getting cut short after a whole series of ejections in the 3rd inning. So, I think you look at those starts and you see again what the repertoire is. You see that he's maintained a solid strikeout to walk ratio, and really at this point, they don't have any other options to consider, so it makes decision-making pretty easy.
I'm glad you mentioned that. That's where I was going to go. David J. Mad Friars with us right now on Jon and Jim. You know that fine line in baseball, right? Where is a player ready, or is it necessitated that he is ready? Would he have forced his way through? Again, it's hard, obviously, with the particulars. If there's a 5-man rotation, there's a 5-man rotation. You can't really force your way through if there's health, but was he destined to appear in the big leagues, in your opinion, at some point in 2024, regardless of these injuries or not?
Yeah, I mean, we had him to start the year. We had him just outside the top 10 in the system. That was before a whole series of trades and all the rest and graduation. So he's now very clearly, the 3rd overall prospect on the pitching side in the system behind Lesko and Snelling, who are still further away. When we wrote him up, we said it was likely he'd get some big league innings this year. It's probably earlier than they would have really ideally hoped, but he was certainly the guy coming into the year that you looked at and you said he's got the pedigree, the profile, and the track record that you would expect to see him be in the mix when and if something was needed. But he did come into the year behind guys like Waldron and Vasquez and really Brito as starting options at the big league level. But here we are.
Here we are. And you mentioned they don't really have any other options here. Is there a name that you could see, okay, maybe this guy may get called up if Andy Mazur does not work out, or is every name that you think of just going to be very risky if that happens?
Yeah. So, first of all, just it's Adam, and I appreciate you made that same mistake because I spent.
Did I say Andy?
Yeah,
you sure did.
Oh, I did. I knew it. Dang it!
And every time I went to publish something with his name in it last year, I had to stop and double check and make sure I had it right. So
It's so hard because Andy Mazur and it's yeah. Okay.
Totally get it. Literally, that was the last thing I did before I published any piece that had him in it last year was go back and double check. Done it. So, I think if something were to happen and they needed a stopgap, one-time start, and you look at the minor leagues at this point, the only guy who you'd consider maybe doing that with is Jackson Wolf, who of course got a one-time spot start for the club back in 2022, and then was promptly traded to Pittsburgh a few weeks later, and is now back in the system. He's had some ups and downs in El Paso this year. His control hasn't been as fine as it really needs to be for a guy who works with the velocity right under 90 miles an hour that he does. But if there was a situation where they were in a doubleheader and they needed to bring up somebody who could work innings, it's probably him. Otherwise, I think if they find themselves in need of somebody for any extended period of time, you're looking at stretching out either Brito or Adrian Morejon from the big league bullpen, and then bringing up a relief option, and a guy, if you're looking for somebody who most folks probably don't know his name, Lake Bacher, who was originally drafted back in 2016, is a righty who's got a really good mix of stuff, including a high RPM fastball that plays really well at the top of the zone. I could see him coming up as a multi-inning bullpen guy and moving one of those guys who's currently in that role into the rotation if they had to.
David J., Mad Friars with us right now on Jon and Jim. As is written in my contract, I have to ask you about Ethan Salas. So I will. I know he turned 18 June 1st, so I know he's playing well above his weight class, so to speak, in advanced A, even though he spent a little bit of time in Double A even last year. It looks like it's still been a slow go. I mean, just look at the numbers. I know he homered within the last week or two. It's his only of the year. His OPS remains under 600. His batting average remains under 200. Is there anything to be learned from what we've seen over the first 2 months of the season for Salas in Single A?
I think, like you said, you started to see a little bit more production here in the last few weeks. But he's a guy who's still not striking out very much. His strikeout rate is actually down from where it was last year. He's walking more. Part of it is the balls he's put in play just haven't turned into hits. I think his batting average on balls in play is somewhere around 250. Now, some of that is he's not hitting the ball as hard as we were seeing in the spring, but some of that is a feature of bad luck. I think everybody would have loved to see him go out and set the world on fire from day one. I think, the reality of a now barely 18-year-old, a kid who, if he had stayed in Florida in his teenage years, would be, at the top of this year's draft class as a high school senior. He's holding his own. He hasn't looked overwhelmed in his at bats. He's making good swing decisions. Largely, he's expanded a little bit recently, but I think there's no reason to worry yet. But I think we can safely put aside the pipe dreams from early in spring this year of Ethan Salas, big leaguer 2024.
Jeremiah Estrada was in the minors briefly, AAA. I think he was there for like 8 games or so. Did you expect to see this from him with the Padres this year?
Oh, absolutely. Didn't everyone?
Of course. Right.
Yeah.
Perfect answer. Yes, we all saw this coming.
Yeah, exactly. It was a great waiver wire pickup in the off season. I've seen the Cubs 40-man roster. I certainly think there are some guys who I would have gladly let go to hold on to somebody with his velocity, but he's done a great job of dialing it in. And being in the strike zone effectively a lot more. And certainly that's a tribute to Rob Marcello, to Ruben Niebla, and if you listen to Estrada himself, to Joe Musgrove and the time that they spent together at Camp 44. So, great to see. It is worth remembering. I dare you, even though you just heard it a whole bunch of times last week, to tell me whose record he broke for most consecutive strikeouts.
We know.
We know.
Of course we know.
It was that one guy.
That guy.
That one guy.
Yeah, that guy. That's
exactly very good.
Yeah. And of course, bullpen. He's not going to continue to strike out 80% of the batters he faces. I think we can safely agree that that's not the long-term future.
DFA.
It is, but what he's doing is fantastic and desperately needed, in part because a couple of guys who were really effective out of the bullpen last year as rookies, Tom Cosgrove and Alec Jacob, have really struggled this year. Both of them finally seem to maybe be putting it together a little bit down in El Paso. And that's obviously going to be an important thing to watch if Cosgrove in particular can get back to the sort of movement he had on the sweeper last year. He becomes an important weapon to be in the bullpen later on this year. But it's been a real slog for him. He lost his release point a little bit and just hasn't been able to get that same life on it. So that's going to be an important piece to keep an eye on, I think.
Great insight as always for Padres fans from David J. Always available to you as well at madfriars.com. Everything you need to know about the major and minor leagues for Padres fans. David, we appreciate you doing it as always.
Thanks, man.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, guys.